Hello, 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 gorgeous soul. You're listening to Answering the Inner Call podcast. I'm your host, Malika Lee. It's so wonderful to be with you again. I still have a little in my throat, so no singing today. But we're going to continue. I don't even know if I'd have a song for this. But if I can't think of anything, but if you can, the themes are going to be around like connection and ebony and ivory living together in perfect harmony. So it's about like the polarities and things integrating and coming together. Because in this episode, we're talking about, I've just done the 5 points of being a shining spiritual star. And if you haven't listened to this series already, please check that out. And this part, I'm going to talk about some areas of integration and how they relate to each other. So just a quick crash course. You know, the 5 points of the spiritual superstar. 1 point is having a spiritual practice. And that could include meditation, being out in nature, like things that really fill up your cup. It could be things around journaling or acts of service, going into community and being of service in some ways and volunteering. So that's under spiritual practice. We have spiritual study, which is a mental exercise, and usually the way a lot of us get into this, which is through thought, reading, studying, learning from other people. We have answering the calls, which are listening and hearing the voice of inspiration and taking action on that. We have doing the healing work, which is facing and doing our emotional work, healing our past traumas. And this is the work where a lot of the juice is, because it is from this space and doing this work and cleanup that we begin to embody more and more of our spiritual qualities. We can read about it. We can, take action. All of those are important. But also, it's the healing work that impacts the energy we show up with when we're taking the action. Are you coming with good energy or not so much? Because it's not just about the action. It's the underlying energy and intentionality that you come with. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but a story's coming to mind, so I'll share that at another time related to that. And I'll just say very quickly that A Course in Miracles really talks about, there's only 2 choices we have, love and fear. And one of the things I really appreciate with its teachings is that it distinguishes that the actions that we take, it's not about the actions we take as so much as what we're taking them with. Are we taking these actions from a place of love? Or are we taking them from a place of fear? And fear would also include guilt. Am I doing this because I don't want to be a bad person, et cetera, et cetera. That what we do and who we do it with, love or fear, or what we do it with, is more important than just the action itself. So I digress. And the last step is rest and surrender. So spiritual practice, answering inner calls and acting on inspiration, spiritual study, doing the healing work, and rest/surrender. Those are the 5 points. So I want to talk about in this episode how they're all interrelated. So yes, I've carved them out, right? They're each independent of each other, but they are still each part of the bigger picture, which is the star. So to give an example of how they are all connected and what's important with them is generally, in my own personal experiences, it's through rest and surrender and my spiritual practice, depending on what the practice is, but especially if it's of a stiller nature, meaning meditation or journaling. When I quiet my conscious mind and I'm more still, then that's when I can hear clearly the calls, those inner calls and inspiration that show up, because I have the space and the stillness of listening to myself. So, and when I built that muscle, then when I can hear it better when I'm still, I've noticed that over time, even when I'm in the world, that I can take a very short period of stillness within myself, even if there's motion around me, like if I'm driving, and still have enough stillness to tune in and listen and ask for guidance and get calls. So that's how those are related, right? From my experience, is like if I'm meditating, which is a part of a spiritual practice, if I'm journaling, if I'm reading, if I give myself permission to be still, then that's when I can get clarity and inspiration, which are the calls to action. And you know what I call the answering the inner calls, but those are invitations to action and inspiration. So that's an example of how they're interrelated. Similarly, and I alluded to this in a previous episode, that answering calls could also be connected to healing work and healing your emotional work. So there are a couple of calls that come to mind that speak to me around this personally. And I'll give you 3 very high level. And if you all are interested in hearing more specifically about each of these, I would let me know. And I would be happy. You could just put in the comments the short name. So here are the 3 calls. And then if you want to hear the story or my experience with one of these or all of these, then let me know in the comments just by putting the single word to make it easy for everyone. Okay. So 3 calls that I got that related to my healing work and the healing of my heart. One was related to fostering a puppy. One was related to taking classes and coursework in spiritual psychology. And one was related to singing. So in each of those 3 invitations and answering the calls, they directly connected to healing aspects emotionally within me, of my heart, and supporting me in becoming more of myself, more joyous, more loving, more fun, more free, more peaceful. Those were the outcomes. I didn't know that at the time, but they came from taking those actions that were presented to me as far as inspiration and invitation. So that's how there's another integration, right, or cross commingling between some of the points. That's another example. Spiritual practice and spiritual study also go hand in hand, in the sense that part of my spiritual practice, especially pretty early on, was related to study and getting an intellectual understanding of things. And so that is another way of how having a spiritual practice and doing something regularly that nurtures you can be connected to spiritual study. I just think that in my experience, that was all there was the spiritual study and the spiritual practice. And these other elements weren't really called out to the fore. And so I'm thinking I'm doing all that I can do. And then my spiritual guide called me out and said, "You've been doing a lot of spiritual study, honey, but your spiritual work needs work." And I was like, what? I didn't even know what that meant. Now, years later, I have an understanding that my spiritual work was getting my being in alignment with the fuller expression of the spirit, right? Of being loving, of being kind, of being compassionate, of being patient, of being powerful. All of these things that cannot be accessed through spiritual study alone. So I think that covers it and should give you a very robust idea of how all of these points conspire together to support you in a fuller expression of the radiant being that you are. And again, if you are curious and want to know more about some of the calls that I answered and how they directly related to supporting my emotional work and healing journey of healing my heart, then just one word, whether it's sing or singing, dog, or puppy. No, let's just not even have or. So in the comments, if you want to hear about one of those 3 stories, either put school, puppy, or sing. And I'll be happy to share more about that in a future episode of how those directly related to helping me become a more loving being. Much love until the next time. Peace.